Many years ago, it was not just a satellite station. It was a major station in Kampala.
It's a shame to see that such a national facility has been ignored and forgotten.
MV Pamba and MV Kawa, they have been packed for some time.
The only new thing is a signpost for Uganda Revenue Authority, the cash office.
Now, because the vessels were not coming, so we had to review the targets by a very big figure, maybe reduce them by over 85%.
We just revamp it, have the right people in the right offices doing the right duty.
Everybody has a place that puts them at peace. A place where the mind reconstructs and fades away with the wind. A place where the beautiful arc of God's artistry paints its best for mankind. Port Bell is that place for me. An 11-kilometer ride into the Kampala suburb of Nakawa, it sits there. Gently and elegantly, unimposing and yet striking with its beauty. Over the years, I have seen people take boat cruises here. I have seen large and small fish get caught. I have seen big abandoned ships, and I have been calmed by the unique beauty of this port. I've often asked myself, what are the stories behind these big abandoned ships? Do they have owners? Are their owners thinking about them? I've also asked myself, what stories do they hide within them? Which people rode on them, and what stories did the water give them? But perhaps my most pressing of these questions has been, if this indeed is a port, then why is it not as active as many other ports of the world?
Go to Luzira for 2-3 days, you may not see any vessel going out or coming in. So it's a bit pathetic on the lake in terms of lake transport. It's very quiet. Lake Victoria is a very big lake, the biggest in Africa. And you'd imagine with the beauty and the attractions on the lake, so many people should be going out there to have fun and of course also fishing activities, but that is not the case.
When we see those old videos of Port Bell, this beautiful, vibrant port that is bringing in and out business, I think it should be the gateway to Uganda that it has always been. Not that it has not been there before, it has been seen before, it has been functional before, and it was run by people, by Ugandans.
The story of Port Bell is large and wide, one that cannot be folded into the small narrative in the archives of Ugandan history. And that perhaps is because the port itself is older than modern-day Uganda. Port Bell was first considered as a landing and resting ground for the Imperial British flight to Sudan. It is pictured here landing on water in 1912.
This is probably the first port on Lake Victoria that acted as at first as an airport. Then in the early 1930s, there was already a railway link linking Port Bell to Kampala. But around 1960, in the 60s, 62, around there, during the floods, the port got submerged and got abandoned for some time. Then in 1992, Uganda got assistance from the Danish, and the line was reinstated. It started operations since 1992 up to when the concession came in 2006.
The nearby Silver Springs Hotel was constructed as a waiting place for passengers. By 1930s, driven by the need to guarantee a stable flow of goods from the British Protectorate of Buganda, Hesketh Bell established a port with ferry connections to Kisumu and Mwanza.
Many years ago, it was not just a satellite station. It was a major station in Kampala, because that's when you had many vessels, vessels like Umoja, from Tanzania, vessels like Uhuru. There was a vessel from Kisumu. Then you had Pamba from Uganda, you had Kawa, and then Kabalega. So at the time when you had all those vessels, it was a very, very big collection station.
That linkage gives Uganda connectivity to the high seas, both at Mombasa and Dar es Salaam.
The railway, termed as the Lunatic Express then, was in those areas. The port would be named after him, and in the years following, it was connected to the Uganda Railway to transport particularly cotton and coffee, the two crops that grew majorly at that time.
For over 10 years, the ships on the lake at Port Bell were not carrying the wagon ferries as they are supposed to do. They were instead transporting bulk cargo, but they were built to take wagon ferries and make them cross the lake to the ports of Kisumu and Mwanza.
In the subsequent governments of Obote and Amin, the port progressively gained its foot as a major trade route in East Africa.
It was a major station in Kampala, because that's when you had many vessels, vessels like Umoja, from Tanzania, vessels like Uhuru. There was a vessel from Kisumu. Then you had Pamba from Uganda, you had Kawa, and then Kabalega. So at the time when you had all those vessels, it was a very, very big collection station.
Its legacy in the colonial and post-independence Uganda is inked deep in the naming of its ferries. Merchant vessels took on the names of Pamba, a Luganda word for cotton, Kawa, a Luganda word for coffee. Prior to them was Mwanga, a king of Buganda at the time, and Kabalega, the notorious and assertive king of Bunyoro. Combined, the ferries were the backbone of Uganda's trade with the region.
A station like Port Bell would be having a target of around 1.3 billion per month. 1.3 billion. And they would collect over and above that. It was a station which would perform over and above the target, because you would have a lot of cargo come through, a lot of rice, a lot of sugar and bags, and it was even very popular in bringing polythene bags, Kavera. It was actually, I think people found it easier to use it, and plastic items from manufacturers in Kenya. A ship would come loaded with a lot of plastics. Plastics was predominant. Then Kavera, the polythene, the carriers were actually very, very popular. So those were the major revenue generation items.
The most industrious ship of them all was MV Kabalega, which plied the route to both Mwanza and Bukoba. If you look closely at the ships at this port, it is missing.
We got information from the police that there was an accident on the lake involving two vessels. And that news, I had a colleague of mine called Stephen Chandia, who is now working with the UN, We worked on the story together, and we relied mostly on government sources to get the news, because the incident happened in the middle of the lake. It was a sad incident because we have very few vessels in the country, and when this occurred, it meant that we're almost left with nothing on the lake. And the editors treated it as a very big story. Many sources attributed it to challenges within the sector, and they advised that this sector should be privatized to be able to improve on efficiency. Because you can't imagine, these vessels have designated routes which they are supposed to take when they are going, and then the other one coming. And you can't imagine a situation where these two vessels can collide on a lake, but it happened. One key thing which we left unattended to was the fact that the wreckage of the ship was not retrieved from the lake.
The accident that led to Kabalega's collapse was surrounded with many questions, but equally it marked the start of a very troubling time for the port. To start with, governments both in Kenya and Uganda set in motion a concession deal that effectively took control of rail assets from government and placed them into the hands of a private company, the Rift Valley Railways Consortium. Month on month, rails failed, the port's trade numbers dwindled, and by 2017, when the concession was cancelled, nearly every government-owned ship and the rail to Port Bell had ground to a halt.
The service had deteriorated so much.
MV Kabalega was never retrieved from its crash scene.
If there was oil, it would kind of have localized impacts where this occurred. If oil spills on the lake, for instance, it can block oxygen from penetrating into the deeper layers of water. You know, oil will always float on top of water. So this will have a lot of impact on the aquatic organisms which feed the fish, and this can ultimately also have an indirect impact on the human population that derive a livelihood from fish.
We tried very much to urge RVR to operate the route, but they could not. It's only after the concession was terminated that we are able to start operations.
A commission of inquiry led by the current Chief Justice Bat Katurebe, launched after the accident, found that the ships that crashed that day had been manned by poorly trained staff and particularly lacked communication equipment.
Government needs to do a study, or it could be a commission of inquiry, to find out who is culpable, who did what, and then after that, roll out a master plan.
Under the new management of RVR, hopes had been raised for a revamp of both the port and ferries that sail the water. The port used to bring in nearly 1.3 billion worth of revenue, but that figure today is billions shy of the current annual value. For over 2 weeks, the NBS Investigations desk went over the data on exports and imports to the port for the last 15 years, combing for particularly revenues on coffee and cotton imports and exports. We have found that the trade volume has declined by 98.5% over the course of 15 years under scrutiny. In just the first year of privatizing the port to the concession deal, tonnage to the port went down 66.2% and never recovered from that slump. In the last financial year, the total tonnage to the port was 1.4% of what the port received in 2003.
Now, because the vessels were not coming, so we had to review the targets by a very big figure, maybe reduce them by over 85%.
The tripartite of Ugandan government-owned ships included MV Kabalega, MV Pamba and MV Kawa. And then when they're all functional, this port used to bring in at least 1.3 billion shillings a month. MV Kabalega has since sunk and has never been retrieved, and Pamba and Kawa sit behind and refurbished, and the earnings of this port have now come down to 50 million shillings on average.
Port Bell highlights the condition of other state infrastructures that are in such a sorry state. So it takes an overhaul of leadership. It takes realignment of our priorities as a nation, not just as parliament, but at all levels.
In 2017, after years of haggling, government cancelled the contract of RVR, but that set in motion many questions.
We just have to have the right people in the right offices doing the right duty, and in the event of failure to execute the right duty that they're supposed to execute, there would be right consequences.
URA runs a lot with the different players and partners. If, for example, if you told us that there are more vessels which have come on that route, and you have the infrastructure improved, we are very quick to swing into action and make sure that we up our game, we up our resources to match at the level of business. So, but we cannot kickstart the whole chain.
We need a serious master plan from government to be able to reinvest in this area so that people can use it to improve our economy, to go for leisure activities. So many things can happen on the lake.
We shall follow what the concession contract provides for in terms when it comes to termination, who is supposed to pay who, what is supposed to be compensated, and all those will be determined by the court.
There are now renewed efforts to revamp the port.
We are going to renovate the port facilities. The warehouse will be renovated. The parking area will be constructed. The fencing around will be reinstated. So not all is lost, and together with the government and the development partners, we shall see the port rehabilitated and even remodeled.
The classic underline for incompetence can be found in the Port Bell story, a port that's functioning now at 0.4% of its capacity, and one that has run down its trade volumes by 98.5% in the last 15 years. The question that we now put to you is, for whom did this incompetence work? And why was it let to go on for 15 years? Raymond Mujuni, NBS Investigates.